Nice to see you back. Welcome to Rising. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Robby Soave, and this is Briahna Joy Gray. We don't introduce ourselves every day. I think they know who we are by now.
We're a big family at this point.
That is certainly what it feels like. All right, let's get straight into the show. First off, New Atlanta Journal-Constitution polling shows President Biden trailing former President Trump in Georgia by a whopping 8 points. Meanwhile, 19% of respondents say they hadn't decided yet between the two. Since the AJC's last polling just 2 months ago, Biden has dropped 7 percentage points in the Peach State.
ABC polling released last week finds just 33% of the country approves of Joe Biden's job performance thus far, a record low for his presidency and for any president in the last 15 years. Worse for Biden, just 28% of respondents said they believed he has the, quote, mental sharpness to serve another 4 years. Even rapper Meek weighed in. He was flamed on Twitter yesterday for stating what many Americans are clearly already thinking. He wrote, "Joe Biden is too old to be our president. Respectfully, WTF is going on in the American system that y'all are pushing this through like it's okay to trust what we're seeing. We're talking missiles, advanced technology, mental and physical warfare. That's not a lane for the older." Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris made her case for another 4 years during a one-on-one with ABC News this week. Let's watch.
Obviously can't change the president's age. So what is your plan to try and change this perception? How do you do that?
I'll tell you the reality of it is, and I spent a lot of time with President Biden, be it in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room, and other places. He is extraordinarily smart. He has the ability to see around the corner in terms of what might be the challenges we face as a nation or globally.
But it doesn't seem that that's getting out and resonating with Americans, with a lot of your supporters. How do you cut through that and make sure that they're seeing the Joe Biden that you were just describing?
Well, I mean, listen, you're here with me in South Carolina. You saw every room we went in, the numbers of people who are there applauding quite loudly. And they're applauding for me and they're applauding for Joe Biden.
What's incredible is that the answer to that question, how you get voters to see a different side of Joe Biden or more of Joe Biden or your perspective on Joe Biden, would be to have a Democratic primary. If for the last 8 months, Joe Biden had been on debate stages, doing town halls, interacting with the public, and having to distinguish himself and his views from the other candidates in the field the same way Republicans have been doing, then we'd have some sense of the man and perhaps a different perspective on his stamina and his ability to lead. But Democrats have put themselves in a situation where they not only shut down a primary, they changed the debate schedule, didn't put Joe Biden on the ballot in New Hampshire, trying to disqualify the state altogether, and then now are looking around confused as to why voters have no idea who this guy is and are easily persuaded by the worst version of him that obviously the conservative media is going to put out there. They really did seem to make their own bet on this one.
Yeah, it would sharpen him. It would help him to participate. The same is true for Donald Trump, obviously. Yes. He was refused to do any of the debates. I think, frankly, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis have gotten better every time they've had to do it. In their last debate, where it was just the two of them arguing, was some of the most substantive criticism of each other and actually, frankly, of Donald Trump, which they need to do. So there's no reason not to participate, and it's just, again, another strategic blunder on Democrats' part that they have not subjected him to this process at a time where their voters are clearly saying they're at least interested in exploring alternatives. Then if you give them alternatives and they say, no, we're actually sticking with Joe Biden, well, then at least you've run that experiment. But why you would not do that when poll after poll shows him down nationally and shows him down in the key swing states, including Georgia. So now he's 8 points down in Georgia, a state that in the 2020 election flipped red to blue. And then in the 2022 midterms, and then immediately following the election, both Senate seats flipped blue during those special elections that were held there. In 2022, one of those seats was successfully held and defended by Democrats. This was becoming a state that, even to the extent it was interested in Republicans, it was specifically interested in non-Trump Republicans. Its governor, Brian Kemp, Republican governor, had his standoff with Trump over the election, stuck to principles, was attempted to be forced out by Trump, didn't happen. It remains very popular, but otherwise becoming a Democratic state, a blue state. And now you see that voters that Biden's 8 points down in that state, a state he needs to win. He needs to win it. He needs to win Arizona. He needs to win either Pennsylvania or Michigan, something like that. These are all places where voters are showing signs of fatigue with the Biden administration.
Yeah, and I will note that in some ways this is not surprising. I remember listening to interviews with election workers, door knockers, people who were working to turn folks out for the Democratic Party in the wake of 2020. And what they clearly said is that we used all of our political capital on this race. Joe Biden told us that we needed Georgia. Joe Biden told us that we needed Georgia to win the Senate. And we came through and we sold his promises. We talked about stimulus checks. We talked about student debt cancellation. We talked about specifically Biden's promise to cancel all HBCU debt. Georgia is a hub for 3 major HBCUs. And we don't have anything left. If he betrays these promises, we cannot in good faith convince people to come out for him because it was such a reach in the first instance. Biden in 2020 was a candidate that was an alternative to Trump, not an entity in and of itself that people were enthusiastic about. And now I do think that that the Democratic Party should not take lightly that the organizations, the voter groups, people like Black Voters Matter and the like, who did so much of the work on the ground to make sure that people turn out to the polls, simply either are not going to have that same interest in doing so or are just not going to have the same ability to say, hey, this guy is going to make your life better because now he has to defend his record over the last 3 years.
They seem, they being the Democratic Party, seems confident that, well, Trump's going to be the nominee. He'll be front and center again. And that will remind, and we'll just remind voters of how racist and sexist and anti-immigrant he is. And what you want? This is what you want? You want fascism? No, you don't. You're going to vote for Joe Biden. That seems to be their strategy.
And I think,
and at a time where actually, like cable, as we've commented on yesterday, cable news has like stopped even showing things. They think Trump, the things that Trump says are so beyond the pale, they can't even show them to viewers, which is going to actually complicate making that case. If you're too afraid to actually show people what Donald Trump has to say for himself, that's actually going to protect him from criticism. It's the most backward-thinking strategy ever. Of course, it's the one embraced by CNN and MSNBC, but that's a little bit of a digression, but it's interesting.
I think that's right. And I also think that there has to be an acknowledgement that these are not kind of superficial whims. The voters in Georgia who work so hard for voter turnout, they're not people who are saying, well, Joe Biden is old, therefore I'm not interested in him anymore. They're people who have been substantively disappointed by Biden reneging on his own agenda. Democrats are hoping that people will simply forget about a lot of these agenda items, and some of them they very may well. If this were just a standoff between whether abortion rights versus student debt were going to win, I'd say Biden has a solid chance of convincing people that the former is more important than the betrayal on the latter. But Gaza has really thrown an unforeseen monkey wrench into the machinery here. And when you look at states like Michigan with their large Arab populations, and you look at the thousands and thousands of voters who are saying, not only am I not going to vote for Biden today, he is now irredeemable in my eyes because this is not an abstraction. This is not about my financial security. This is something like student debt, for example, or the PRO Act not passing, or the $15 minimum wage not passing. This is about the fact that people I know and love on the other side of the world have been killed and are never coming back. That's not something you forget about. And his indifference to the real hurt and pain of his base. 80% of Democrats want there to be a ceasefire, and him acting as though those people are frankly terrorists for wanting that outcome in a foreign policy context is, I think, really going to hurt him.
More Rising right after this.